We'll go ahead and get started. It's exactly 6 o'clock Central Time. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our discussion on the dangers of furniture tip-overs and the IKEA recall cases. My name is David Zivand, and I'm a board member with Kids in Danger and a co-chair for our annual Best Friend Award Night. I'm wearing a tie this evening, not just because this is a special occasion, but also because I was curious to see if I still knew how to put it on. I feel like we're off to a good start. I have just a few announcements to begin with, and then we'll get tonight's conversation going. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, Kids in Danger is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting children by fighting for product safety. KID was founded in 1998 by Linda Ginzel and Boaz Kazar, the parents of 16-month-old Danny Kazar, who died when a portable crib collapsed on his neck in his Chicago child care home. The crib had been recalled 5 years earlier, and the child care provider had been inspected just a week before. All of KID's efforts and our efforts here tonight are about preventing tragedies like that. So much of the work of KID is invisible. And speaking of that, before I go any further, I want to thank a few individuals you won't even see tonight. First, Dawn Kasserman, my co-chair for the Best Friend Award, who has inspired me to keep my remarks short. KID's Assistant Director, Dave Gauda, who has done the heavy lifting to get this evening online. And of course, our longtime Executive Director, Nancy Coles, who truly does inspire many of us every day. I know I speak for the entire board when I say that you all have our deep gratitude. So this gathering is a first for us. When we realized our May event could not take place, we, of course, wanted to find a way to still raise funds. We also saw an opportunity to tell more people about the many things that KID works on. Tonight is the first of 3 conversations to be followed by a rescheduled Best Friend Night on October 15th, a virtual tribute to our 2020 Best Friend Award honorees, Danny and Ann Shapiro. Registration is already available for our next event on August 5th, a conversation with a longtime ally, U.S. Representative Jen Schakowsky, about the current regulatory and legislative environment. But on to tonight. This evening is generously sponsored by the Tomasic, Coton, and Kasserman law firm. If you haven't done so already, we hope you will help support KID with a donation. All amounts are welcome. Anything $20 and above will be entered to win a terrific wine tasting. Details are on the site where you registered, and we will share them again later. We hope to have a brief question and answer session this evening. Please send your questions in via the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen. By now, we're all getting pretty familiar with it. I'm honored to introduce the 3 participants in tonight's conversation about furniture tip-overs and the IKEA dresser recall. Kids in Danger has been active on these issues for a long time. The moderator for tonight's event is attorney Sean Kasserman, current president of the board for Kids in Danger and a longtime supporter of the group. He is an officer with the Illinois State Bar Association and a founder of the Tomasic, Coton, and Kasserman law firm. 20 years ago, he served as the attorney for Linda and Boaz, the founders of KID. I'll be talking this evening with 2 honored guests. First, Dan Mann, a partner in the law firm of Feldman Shepard. He's with us tonight because of his incredibly important work on the IKEA tip-over cases, which we will hear more about soon. Only after 3 known deaths did IKEA recall the product class, affecting 29 million units. Dan has secured nearly $100 million for 4 families whose toddlers were killed by these faulty dressers. Finally, we're so grateful to have with us this evening Crystal Ellis, a mom, a librarian, and now an inspiring advocate for product safety. She is a founding member of Parents Against Tip-Overs, a nationwide network seeking an end to TV and furniture tip-over injuries and deaths. Crystal's son, Camden, was the victim of the tip-over of a 3-drawer IKEA dresser in the bedroom of his home in Snohomish, Washington. Despite heroic efforts to save him, Camden died on June 15th, 2014, a few days after his 2nd birthday. Please virtually welcome these very special guests. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I'll turn it over to Sean. As soon as he unmutes himself.
Is that good? Thank you, David. And hello, everybody, and welcome tonight. I want to start by letting everybody know how proud I am to be sitting on the screen with these two individuals. They're both heroic in different ways, but as a parent and as a lawyer, I know greatness in each of those categories, and I am blessed to be on the screen with each of you. What I'd like to do, Crystal, and this is a little different, but I think this is important. Tell us about Camden. What was Camden like?
Well, this is Camden, if you haven't seen a picture of him before. He was a bright light in our lives. He was our firstborn child, our only son, and we called him the little engineering mind because he really thought a lot about things and was very cautious and very careful. And he was a mama's boy. He loved, when he got hurt, he came to me, but he loved to follow dad around and see what he was up to and investigate. Just a really loving, caring, observant child.
And when Camden died, he had a little sister, right, who was just 3 months old?
Yes. Caitlin was just 3 months old when Camden died. And we also now have Kaya, who is just turned 3 at the end of June.
And what do they ask about their brother? What do they know? How do you handle that?
We have pictures of Camden up around our house. We don't shy away from the conversation. I do have to say that there are some great groups out there around the country that really help support siblings who have lost, a brother or sister. And that has been really helpful too, because as a parent, I had no idea how to plan a funeral, and I had no idea how to explain grief to small children in a way that was accessible to them. And it's been a learning process, and I'm glad for the supports. But how do you explain? There's a little bit of childhood lost when you think about, explaining to a toddler that, you have a sibling, but he's not here anymore.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do first, can you tell us all just a little bit about the dresser, where you got it, how you got it, how did it end up in your house?
Well, we were first-time parents. I had decked out my entire first apartment in IKEA, and we had a very limited budget, but we really wanted to make our nursery super cute. I mean, every parent especially expecting their first baby is really obsessed with what the nursery looks like. And so we went to the IKEA store in Portland, Oregon, where we were living at the time, and we found a crib that matched this dresser. I mean, they were the same stain, and it was little. It was only 3 drawers, just over 30 inches tall. I thought, wow, it's going to be the right height, to introduce him to being able to dress himself. And it's, just looked kid friendly. It looked really kid friendly. And so, we brought it home. We spent the proverbial 12 hours piecing all of it together, and and waited for his arrival. We painted the room, we did all the stuff, but that trip didn't seem unusual. And we were a part of the family plan as well, the IKEA family membership.
Now, when you bought that dresser, had you ever heard of furniture tip-overs?
No, I mean, I've said this before in other conversations, but I live on the West Coast, and I've pretty much always lived on the West Coast. We've had earthquakes my whole life. We've had school drills where we climb under our desks. And so when I assessed my home as far as tip over risk, I was really thinking about earthquakes. I had my bookcases anchored. I had my china hutch anchored. But no, I didn't have this dresser that was just over 30 inches tall anchored, because there was no way that it was going to be a bad outcome in an earthquake in my mind.
Sure. Well, you had the worst outcome. What happened? Tell us what happened.
Well, the morning, 2 days before Camden's second birthday, I was just finishing feeding Caitlin, and my husband got up to get Camden ready for breakfast. He had prepared breakfast, and Camden was usually getting up around this time, but we had a baby that was up all night, so it wasn't unusual. We didn't think that was unusual. It was the second night in his toddler bed. We were transitioning him to that big boy bed, and I just remember the sound of my husband screaming. I mean, I have never before or since heard a sound like that, but my husband opened the door, and Camden had leaned into the second drawer, I'm assuming to get clothes because he was experimenting with dressing himself. And as he leaned into the second drawer, the first drawer came out and trapped his neck between the two drawers, and the weight of the dresser pinned him to the ground. So he couldn't move. He couldn't scream. I immediately, after hearing that scream, jumped up, put the baby down, and ran in there and couldn't even process what I was seeing. At that point, my husband had gotten him unentangled from the dresser, and my training as a person in aquatics and then as an educator, I immediately started CPR. My husband called 911. But the whole time it's like my husband almost had to slap me to get me to, realize that this was really happening. So we brought him, they were able to stabilize him. They brought him to Seattle Children's Hospital, but he unfortunately never woke up. He spent 4 days in a coma. We spent his second birthday in the PICU, and he never got to open his presents. He never got to celebrate with us. And then 2 days after that, on Father's Day, we said goodbye to him and donated his organs to other families so that hopefully they wouldn't have to experience what we were experiencing.
So Dan Mann, was Camden the first child to have been killed by an IKEA dresser?
He was not. First of all, thank you for your introduction. I'm honored to be here. I can't, at some point during this conversation, I want to talk about sort of my perspective on the really important work that KID does and that Nancy does. And I don't see it as silent work at all from where I sit. It's loud and it's really important. And I'm also honored to be here with Crystal, who was one of the 4 families that we represented. We became aware of this issue when a little boy named Curran Collis passed away in February of 2014. And we met with his family shortly thereafter, and we started investigating this problem. And at the time, we didn't really have any sense of the scope of the tip over problem or it happens for it's a multifactorial reason when you get to this place. But what we learned was that IKEA decided to ignore the ASTM voluntary performance requirements, the testing requirements for dressers. And they made a conscious decision to not test their dressers to the performance requirements. And as a result of that decision, you end up with these millions and millions of dressers on the market. And that's what we learned. And so Camden died a couple of months later for a number of reasons. I don't think that we met Crystal till for over a year after it happened. And since then, we represented 2 other families. And in the process, we learned that there were numerous other deaths that occurred before Curran Collis as well.
And Dan, is it that IKEA decided not to submit its dresser to testing, or do you think that they tested it and realized it wouldn't pass, so they didn't formally have it tested?
Well, they knew it wouldn't pass, but they made a conscious decision that because it was their position that users should secure it to anchor the dressers to the wall. And if it's anchored, they believed it would pass the test. So that was their way of sort of ignoring this requirement that almost every other manufacturer in America chose to comply with, right? And there are lots of business reasons for that. You know, the IKEA dressers are lighter. There are a lot of reasons as to why they got to that place. But at the end of the day, what you have is you have millions and millions of dressers out there in the market being bought for kids' rooms because they're inexpensive, because they look nice, and the parents are completely unaware that there's a testing requirement and that this dresser intentionally did not comply with the testing requirement and wouldn't pass the test.
And IKEA justified that under the claimed belief that all parents would fasten the dresser to a wall. Is that what they're trying to tell you?
Yeah, but I mean, they knew, and all of us know, that parents don't anchor these dressers. First of all, I mean, there are lots of problems with this. You can look at sort of the instructions and the pictograms. You can look at the fact that initially IKEA didn't include any hardware to anchor the dressers to the wall, that IKEA knew that consumers were not going to do this, but it was their sort of justification to avoid compliance with the testing requirement, which they believed probably would lend itself to heavier dressers, increased shipping costs, increased price points. And so that was sort of their justification, even though everyone knows that parents don't anchor units like this to the wall, that they don't know that it's dangerous. And especially in Crystal's case, when the dresser, I mean, when people are thinking about dressers, they might be thinking about big dressers. Here you're talking about a dresser that's 30 inches tall. And there's no way that anybody looking at that dresser would say, this is dangerous, this could kill my kid. And
My son was in fact taller than the dresser.
Yeah, and all of the parents that we represented, I mean, we walked into their homes, and their homes are baby proof and safety proofed in every way. And so if you look at that, then you have to wonder, well, whose responsibility is it to make people aware of this? You know, when a manufacturer is out there selling millions and millions of units and knowing that people aren't anchoring the units, and knowing that people don't appreciate the danger.
I mean, this isn't a freak accident, right, Dan? There are 2 to 3 kids that are dying each month as a result of furniture tip overs.
There are 2 to 3 kids that are dying each month, but the thing that's actually even more important is there are thousands of tip overs that happen each month where no one's injured, where a child gets out of the way, where a parent catches the dresser, where the dresser, because it's used in a bedroom, falls into a bed. So the children are there's a safety space for them, and there, but for the grace of God, go other lives, right? And that's the defect presenting itself. And the, you know, the great tragedy here is that there are millions and millions of these units still out in the market, and they need to get out of the marketplace. There's still millions and millions of IKEA recalled dressers out there, and they might not have a long lifespan in terms of sort of how long the dressers are used, because they might not be made as strong as perhaps other dressers. But the great tragedy here is that, and the last thing that I want to be doing is sitting in a parent's living room weeks after this happened and telling them that this product has been recalled, and they say, I had no idea. And that's the real thing that, at least with IKEA, that we need to figure out a way to prevent. The last death that we represented the Collis family, then Camden, then Ted McGee, who died in February of 2016 after I don't want to call it a recall program, but a repair program that IKEA did in conjunction with the CPSC, where they offered anchoring kits, but they didn't say anything about whether or not the dressers complied with testing, and they didn't admit that the dressers were defective. And it was only after Ted's death that that IKEA actually consented to recall the products. And in May of 2017, there was yet another death, Joseph Dudek, who died just outside of Anaheim, California, and his parents were completely unaware of the recall. And they were actually members of IKEA's friends and family. And what we want, or what we think should happen, is that IKEA should use the same efforts that it uses to market the dressers to actually recall the dressers. But I don't think that that has occurred. And so the great tragedy here is there will likely be other toddlers that lose their lives. And sitting here, we know that it's going to happen.
And I want to talk in a minute about some of the things maybe all of us can do to help minimize the likelihood of that. But Crystal, I want to turn to you for a second. How do you shift into this mode where you show so much courage, so much energy, so much stamina? I know one time I heard you say something that you chose to advocate over retreating, but talk to us about that.
Well, I will say the first 3-ish years after Camden died, I just wasn't able to do anything except go to therapy and, save my marriage. So it was a hard road, and the parent shaming is real. I mean, the parent, blowback on this, and the propaganda and marketing and the brand loyalists for IKEA, they really, really were vicious. So I had to come to
the parent shaming. They're shaming you for not knowing to bolt your dresser to a wall.
Yeah, and they don't
So
they don't
sorry.
they only have a snippet of what what they heard or whatever. But I'm telling you, if you've ever been into an IKEA store, there's got to be like pheromones pumped in or something. Like it's like a whole experience. You go and you have the meatballs and you go through the whole thing, and people just have a lot of it's like a lot of these big companies, they spend a lot of money in marketing to get consumers on their side and make them feel like they're important to them, and that so you kind of get sucked into that. And so where was I? Well, I was sleeping. It happened in the middle of the night. I'm allowed to sleep. Oh, well, did you check on him? How many times do you check on your 2-year-old in the middle of the night? And I had actually checked on him because I was up breastfeeding Caitlin at 3:30 in the morning, and he was fine. So long story short, I had to get past that. I had to come to some sort of place where I was telling myself that I did everything I could, that I'm a good mother, that I did everything I could. And then it's really helped that I've met other parents that have endured this tragedy. It started with other parents that have lost children, because I had nobody in my circle that had ever lost a child, period. So it felt very alone. So finding these other parents and then deciding, what can you do here? You can either retreat, or, as a librarian and as a researcher, I said, what really caused this? Because IKEA is honestly just one part of this equation. If you go bigger than that, it's ASTM is a standards making board that has been in a stall pattern for 20 years. They haven't made any significant progress on the very weak voluntary standard. So I believe that even if IKEA had met the voluntary standard, there's a very high likelihood that the dresser would have still been able to kill Camden. And then you go to the lack of regulation from Congress. I testified in front of Congress last year on Camden's birthday, and we introduced with the PAT group. And that was the thing, is all these parents came together that had been through this tragedy, and we decided we've all been kind of yelling into a vacuum in our own area, but let's make a national group. And
so the PAT group is Parents Against Tipovers.
Parents Against Tipovers. And that kind of changed the whole conversation, because when you just have one parent coming to one, congressional representative or a senator or whatever, and then it's just that little part of the country, it sends a different message than when you show up at the CPSC budgetary hearing and represent an entire national group. So that was huge. So then we got invited to speak in front of Congress about Sturdy, and Sturdy is the legislation that we introduced that would allow the CPSC within a year to make a mandatory standard that that manufacturers would have to meet to put their furniture in the marketplace. And the thing is parents believe that anything that's in the marketplace has been tested and vetted by the government. They believe that there would be nothing sold in this country that's unsafe. And it's sad that that's not true. Corporations cannot regulate themselves. It's just against what they are. You know, the only things that affect corporations are lawsuits and money, public shaming, and regulation through government action. And there might be people within the corporation that are moral and kind, but it's not in the best interest of what a corporation does. And so Sturdy makes that mandatory, makes it so that it takes into account dynamic force. So not just gently pulling out the drawer, because right now we have what we call the Jenga test. So you pull out all the drawers, the dresser is entirely empty. If it doesn't fall over, then that's one area to pass. Then each drawer is pulled out individually, and a 50-pound weight is very gently hung on the end. I mean, I'm talking like you just barely back up. If you could blow on it and it would tip over, that's okay. So it doesn't account for any sort of what's in the drawers. And it's not on carpet either. It's on a laboratory testing floor. And a lot of families have carpet in their bedrooms. So it doesn't count for carpet, doesn't count for how children and families actually interact. It doesn't account for, the dresser being full and whatever families use it for. And we just recently lowered the height, because before it was over 30 inches was the only one that was tested. Now it's over 27 inches. So it's going to make a big difference. It passed through the U.S. Congress, and we're waiting for it to get through committee in the Senate and to the floor. And not a lot of legislation right now is getting to the floor, with COVID and other issues in Congress. I mean, the Senate, sorry.
Well, it's obvious that they messed with the wrong mom and librarian.
Yeah, and I've said to IKEA inside conversations before, because we end up at the same, ASTM meetings. We end up at the same ICFSO meetings, which is the International Consumer Product Health and Safety Organization. They're just one piece of the puzzle, and I don't want people to forget that. And that's what our group really tries to push. This is not just an IKEA problem. This is an industry-wide problem. If you have a big, heavy dresser, it can fall over and kill your child. If you have a short dresser, a tall dresser, and recently we found out, anchors don't have a clear standard themselves. So without those being tested, you can actually anchor, and maybe you anchored wrong, maybe you didn't, maybe you anchored right, and it can still fail.
Dan, from your perspective, and Crystal has talked about the many different facets. I've heard you say before that this is kind of a six-legged solution, right? There's more than one thing that needs to be done here.
Yeah, I think that there are, if you think of a table that has 6 legs to support, and they all provide support. First you have to get manufacturers that in advance of a product's release conduct a failure mode and effects analysis and do testing and troubleshoot problems, so that we don't get into a place where there are products that are defective that are out of the market and then have a big problem to clean up, right? Because that's really what happened here. Is there was a financial decision that IKEA made, and they got down this road so far with so many millions and millions of units out there. And it's hard when you're looking at it on the backside of the problem. You've got the government and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and Crystal and I could talk for hours and hours about, the CPSC does a lot of good work, but in some ways they are a toothless tiger, because they can't force manufacturers to do anything unless the manufacturer really wants to. And they operate under a cone of silence because they're not permitted to release information. So even though there might be products out there that are killing kids, the CPSC can't distribute that to the public at large, and we've seen that with the Fisher Price recall.
Let me stop you there just for 1 second, because I want to make sure we all understand that the Consumer Product Safety Commission is prevented by rule from letting parents know about products they know are killing children.
Absolutely, yes. There's a section of the CPSC Act called 6B, and it effectively muzzles the CPSC from letting parents know unless a manufacturer gives permission. And what we learned recently with the recall of the Fisher Price Rock and Play is there were scores of deaths that the CPSC knew about. And there were plenty of children who died after the CPSC knew about these deaths. And yet the recall didn't occur until Consumer Reports was able to obtain some of the information and published an article, and then the Rock and Play was recalled.
Which was entirely by accident, by the way.
Yes.
The release of the information was entirely by accident. So I believe to this day, we wouldn't know about the Rock and Play without that accidental leak. And I'll tell you right now, I absolutely believe there are products in American homes right now that could kill your child, and they probably have a record of killing children. But
so if everybody on this call could do one thing, call your congressman and say they should get rid of Section 6B of the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
There is legislation right now. Bobby Rush of Illinois introduced the Share Information Act, which does just that. So if you could call your U.S. congressperson and say, I support the Share Information Act, that is the piece that's going to help us get rid of 6B and hopefully get that organization, that government agency, a bigger budget down the road. That's separate from this legislation. But I don't know about you, but before this happened to me, I didn't know who or what the CPSC was. I did not know that there was a specific government agency tasked with regulating products and was tasked to protect me. I had no idea. And I think that most people are like me. They just assume that the government is protecting them.
And I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that just stuns me.
Yeah, I do want to come back to the table with 6 legs. So if you've got the manufacturers, you've got the government and the CPSC, you've got the ASTM, which needs to make sure that there are testing standards that are in place that test products according to the way they're used in real life. So, for example, maybe you should actually load a dresser before you test it. You know, it's like trying to test a car without crash testing it, right? You kind of have to drive it to do that. You also have advocacy organizations like Kid in Danger and Consumer Reports. And so after the Collis family hired us, I started to go to all the ASTM meetings in Conshohocken because it's right outside of Philadelphia. And that's where I met Nancy. And the work that organizations like Kids in Danger do is so incredibly vital and important. You can't appreciate it unless you've sat through an ASTM meeting. There are, especially at the time of just after Curran Collis passed away, you know, there were no Parents Against Tip-Overs. It's a room full of manufacturers' representatives, some people from the CPSC, and basically Nancy Cowles, I don't want to leave anybody out, but Nancy Cowles and Consumer Reports and a couple of other consumer organizations on the other side. And they are the only voices that are providing not only a check on what the manufacturers want to do, but actual science. In the half hour before this, I remembered I was looking at my computer at some of the documents from some of the cases, and I'm like, you know, one of the things that Kids in Danger did that's so important is they released these long reports, and there was one in 2016 about furniture stability where they tested 40 or 50 dressers. There was another one on recall effectiveness that was, I think, in 2018 or 2017. you know, there are not a lot of organizations out there that are doing this kind of real scientific work to give some oxygen and shed a light on these problems, and that's really important. And that's it's an important leg of the table. And
Well,
then,
and I will even add on that to say that Nancy goes above and beyond to mentor parents and families and smaller advocacy groups to help guide them and teach them how to be effective. And that has been invaluable to me. It's been so good. And the more voices we have, the more powerful we can be. And I think that's really, really smart that kids recognizing that, and that Nancy has such a kind heart to, you know, to recognize that as well.
I agree with you, and thank you for saying that, Crystal. So we're kind of at the end of our time here. I'm not sure if there are any questions. And I'm being texted here by Nancy as we speak. But what role do attorneys play in all of this, Dan? And I will tell you, I think that you and I probably agree on this, and it'd be great to put trial lawyers out of business. If there were no defective products, we could go find something else to do. But what role do the lawyers have to play in all of this?
yeah, you know, so the IKEA cases and the way that our clients, that Crystal and Janet McGee, who Ted McGee's mom, who was a co-founder of Parents Against Tipovers, and Jackie Collis, who from the outset was the most outspoken client ever. We couldn't stop her from talking to newspapers while the case was pending. And my instinct is always, you know, while a case is pending, I really don't want my clients giving interviews when I'm not there. But it was so important to all three of them to shed light on this problem, because honestly, a lot of the time I feel like I'm a garbage man, just cleaning up a mess at the end. And, you know, one of the things that I feel very fortunate about in this case is that we had clients like Jackie and Crystal and Janet who were willing to go out there and put themselves out there, knowing that, I mean, if you Google anything about any of these cases and then read the comments at the bottom of the internet screen, the things that people say about them are horrific, absolutely horrific. And so in terms of what attorneys can do, I mean, I think that the best thing that attorneys can do is have clients like these three ladies who are willing to get out there and make changes, because I think oftentimes people look at attorneys on the backside of this and say, you know, they're questioning motives. I mean, I think it's important that we shed as much of a light on these problems as we can. But I think what's really important is that there are entities out there like Kids in Danger and Parents Against Tipovers that are taking public stands, and nobody can question what they're doing in this. You know, it's just our job to basically make sure that the case can be proven and that there's support out there. And, you know, IKEA doesn't pay this kind of money unless they know that there is a problem. And there's a big problem here in the industry. And it's something that has to get addressed, or more kids are going to die.
Crystal, let's go to the front end of it then. If you had a room full of CEOs from the different child product manufacturers across the country, what would you say to them? What would you want them to know and to think about and to do as we go forward?
I would emphasize to them that consumer brand loyalty is a big deal. And in the time of social media and in the time of, you know, easy access to, you know, brands, use your power to make safe products. Test before you even put it out on the market. Because for me, you know, I will never trust IKEA again. My extended network will never trust IKEA again, not with a chair, not with, you know, a knife set, nothing. And you know, it's going to take a while, I think, for Fisher Price to get some of that loyalty back too. So protect yourself. Test your products thoroughly, listen to your engineers before you put them on the market. And then if you find that there's a problem, care about your consumers. Pull it, test it again, see what could possibly be going wrong. You know, and if it's consumer error, design the product so that it designs out the consumer error. And that's the biggest thing we've said with tip overs is design a product that doesn't have to be anchored to the wall, because, you know, parents aren't anchoring, and there are ways to make dressers that don't need to be anchored. The design just needs to be different. So care about your consumers, care about your brand, and, you know, continue to make money, but not at the expense of my child.
And as an example of that, right around the time that IKEA resolved the 3 cases, they actually released a new design for the Malm that was the same price, that complied with the testing requirements, that passed the tests. It cost the exact same thing. I mean, so, you know, the good design cannot be understated, but you also have to know how the product is being used in the field, and you need to test it accordingly. And you need to make sure that parents and users of the products are aware of the risks. And you can't stick your head in the sand and say, oh, well, I put this little warning here, even though I know people don't pay attention to it, so I'm just going to wash my hands. That's not the way it works. And I mean, at the end of the day, yes, can lawyers hold those manufacturers accountable for that? Sure. You know, we can go into court and demonstrate that a product was defective. But the idea here is that the system needs to be set up so that on the front end, we don't ever get an opportunity to do that on the back end, that kids aren't hurt. And that's what everybody should be thinking about is how do we create a system where these products never make it to the marketplace because they're changed and the design is changed before it ever happens.
Well, and then, you know, it's hard because in our case with tip overs and with dressers, not every family can anchor. They live in a rental. Their landlord won't let them rent. They don't have the right tools. They don't understand that it has to be in a stud. Whether you think that that's common sense or not, it's not. And then again, we've had failed anchor cases. So, you know, we're always going to preach anchor, and we partner with anchorit.gov, which is the anchoring campaign of the CPSC, to anchor your furniture because it's the next best thing. But it's not foolproof. And so it's very, very unfortunate that that is the solution that they are sticking with for now. And that's why we need Sturdy, because Sturdy enacts a mandatory standard that accounts for those things and will account for a furniture design that doesn't need to be anchored.
That's so true. Now, and we're going to try to wrap up here, but Dan, I want to point one thing out in the conclusion here. We know that IKEA and its employees didn't anchor the dressers that they had in their own homes. Is that correct?
Well, we know from a deposition in one of the earlier cases that there was an IKEA vice president who said, I don't do that. I'm aware of the risk. And, you know, it's just a further example, but everybody who has anything to do with furniture design on the ASTM committee, the manufacturers, the CPSC, they know that there is an incredibly low rate of anchoring dressers to the wall. That is not the solution. That they can pull out a drywall, that it's hard to find a stud, that the studs aren't set to the same width as the dresser, that if it's in front of a brick wall or if there's baseboard heating, it's difficult to anchor, that you need power tools, that what Crystal mentioned about renters, that sometimes people would have to hire a professional to bolt a dresser to the wall that might cost more than the dresser, and also that these dressers are moved and they're given away. And so they don't stay in the same location. And so for all of those reasons, that's not the solution here. That's not the solution. And we need to recognize that and move towards actually solving this problem.
Thanks. Hello, David. Welcome back.
All right, thanks. Boy, I've spent a few years on the sidelines of this topic overall, and every time I engage with something like this, my mind gets blown. I want to thank you, Dan, for being here with us tonight, and for your time and for your kind words about kids in danger. We appreciate it. Nancy is indeed a force. I want to thank you, Crystal. It's hard to hear your story, and I can't imagine how hard it is to talk about it. Just a little housekeeping again. That's why I'm here. Thank you again to our lead sponsor for tonight, the Tomasic, Coton, and Kasserman Law Firm, and thank you, Sean, your founding partner of that firm. I want to thank also our other Best Friend Award sponsors, Lisa Toronto and the Toronto Baking Company, the GATX Company, Linda Ginzel and Boaz Kazar, the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, and Susan Need as well. The raffle portion of our fundraising tonight for that fantastic wine tasting, that will stay open until midnight. There should be some details in the chat window. There are always details at kidsindanger.org, along with a lot of other information. You can sign up for our next conversation on August 5th. Our panelists have agreed to stay on for a while if there's some other chat or questions. I'm going to back out again and let Sean wrap it up as necessary. But again, thank you for being part of this first effort on our part, and thank you for inspiring us, Crystal. We appreciate it. Good night.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, David. You know, we're getting a bunch of questions in through the chat, and one of the questions is repeated a couple different times, and this really, I think, should be answered by both of you. And the gist of it is, what should parents do now that you've kind of made them aware of unknown dangers and we've scared them? But now, what advice do you have for these folks that want to make sure that their children's rooms are safe, for their grandchildren's rooms are safe?
Well, let me start by saying I'm still scared. I don't know as much as they don't know. But I have highly recommended subscribing to the recall website through the CPSC, and KID also has a list of recalls. I also suggest to people that they go to saferproducts.gov, check that database. And also, if you're familiar with the Amazon reviews section, myself, when I was researching a high chair for my youngest, I saw this one that was so cute, because let's be real, the first thing we look at is it cute? Do we want it in our home? Is it aesthetically pleasing? And then, okay, well, let's scroll down and see what people are saying. That first one that I wanted had a whole bunch of 1-star reviews that said the front legs were breaking off and their kids were, losing their front teeth. And I thought, well, that's unfortunate. Why didn't I know about this except, to go to the 1-star reviews? So I always tell people, go to the 1-star reviews, see what people are saying. If it's the wrong color or the shipping was slow, that's one thing. But if the front legs are breaking off and kids' teeth are being lost, then that's a whole other thing. That, by the way, that high chair was recalled a year after I was considering high chairs. So pay attention to construction. And pay attention to if it looks like it's flimsy in the store, if it looks like it could be a choking hazard, or, your gut will no, that looks really cheap, and not necessarily cheap in price, but cheap in construction, or there's some sort of flaw to it. I just walk away. It's just not worth it. And, there's lots of things that we do in baby proofing with the tube, and you stick it through the tube, and if it's fits, then it can't be with somebody under 3 years old. But just really analyze and get on your knees and look around your home the way we do when we originally baby proof. What's at their eye level? What's at their, you know, what's out there?
Dan?
I mean, it's a heck of a question that you just asked, because honestly, in order to make these determinations, you need to be, a lot of times you need to be an engineer or have a degree in sort of pediatric airway specialist, and none of us do, right? And that's why, you know, I would say that it shouldn't be up to the parents to do this kind of investigation in an ideal world, because by the time the product hits the market, it should have gone through at least a layer of testing, reviews, evaluation by engineers and physicians or biomechanical engineers to see how it's used. But that's not possible, right? And because that's not possible, because it doesn't happen, because manufacturers don't do that, it is a minefield out there. And unfortunately, I mean, I sort of see this every day in my work. I didn't even realize I have 2 rock and plays, and for my cases, seated right over there. And, you know, that's something that people would never have recognized as presenting a danger. So I think, you know, what Crystal, who's been down this road and lived through an unimaginable tragedy, gave a very sort of succinct answer as to what parents can do in terms of registering for the recalls, paying attention to that, thinking carefully about what you buy and why you buy it, reading reviews. But I still come back to sort of my home base is parents shouldn't be having to make that determination, because that's not something that parents are equipped to do, right? And in some ways, not to criticize your question, but I mean that it leads us to an argument to blame. It leads you down a road to, well, let's blame the parents for this, and that's something that I just refuse in my core to accept. You know, I think that if you have a product like that, it should never reach the marketplace, because manufacturers or the government or the testing organization should be in a place to do that. And that's what I want to continue to strive for.
Well, I've also said, you know, if you believe so much in your product and you think that, you know, it's consumer error, first of all, again, if you have a problem that you know is consumer error and you can design it out, you should. But regardless, if you really stand behind your product, put all the information out there. Tell me how many kids are dying. Tell me how kids are injured. And then if I, as an American citizen, decide to keep my product, we're not coming into your home to take your recalled product. We're not, you know, coming after you that way. I'm going to question and shake my head, but that's your right. But the problem is I didn't get all the information necessary to make an educated decision for my family. And that's what's wrong. If I had the information that I have now, I would never, I'm at the point where I don't have any dressers in my home. Actually, I take that back. I have one. It's in the guest room and it's anchored, and my kids don't even go to that side of the house. Their playroom isn't over there. Their bedrooms aren't over there. But I just, you know, it just would have given me a lot more information to be an informed decision maker.
And Dan, I think I did ask a bad question, but I did it on purpose, because I think that all of us need to understand that there's so many things out there that we can't control. And the CPS might be able to have a role there, and the ASTM committees might be able to, and the manufacturers certainly can. But as parents, we can't be, not only is it not our responsibility, but we can't be in charge of all of those things. Having said that, let me just give Kids in Danger a plug here, because one of the things we can do, one of the things we can't control, and when I have a niece who is going to be a first-time mother or a relative, I send them to Kids in Danger. The website is going to be the best asset you have in terms of seeing what's out there that you shouldn't be buying or you should be wary of. And then I think that we as parents, when we see a product that didn't function the way it was supposed to, we need to let people know, call the manufacturer. Don't let it, end up at the end of your curb without somebody else being told that this is a problem.
Well, and then let's also go after Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, OfferUp, Buy Nothing, all these places where these products keep popping up and there's no oversight or algorithm that pulls the ones that have at least even been recalled. Because that's a huge problem, because those products keep getting over and over and over again. And whether the seller knew or not, the marketplace should be patrolling.
Yeah, when I travel, I like to go to flea market stores or aftermarket stores and show them the cribs or play yards that have been recalled, and they're still out there. They're still being recycled and retooled.
Mm-hmm. I think Nancy last summer found a drop side crib for free.
Yeah, they're out there. Well, listen, you two, again, I started off by saying this, and I'm going to end up by saying this too. You are my heroes. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for your time tonight. And Crystal, we are all, I don't know how many people are on this call, but I know I speak for every one of us. We are so, so sorry that you lost Camden the way you did.
Thank you so much for all of the work that you do at KID. I don't know what I would be able to do or what resources I would be able to send parents to if I didn't have an organization like KID that I felt really, really was invested and cared about the future of our children.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Good night,
Sean.
everybody.
Good night.